Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cherie Blair of Omnia Strategy and our esteemed panel.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome and introduce our four amazing panelists. First, we have the Honourable Godfred Yeboah Dame, Attorney General and Minister for Justice of the Republic of Ghana. Next, we've got Mr. Kola Karim, Chairman and Group CEO of Shoreline Energy International. And then Mr. Samaila Zubairu, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Finance Corporation. And finally, but not least, Dr. Mark Hutchinson, CEO of Fortescue Future Industries, who very kindly at the last minute substituted for his colleague, Jean, who was here, obviously, because we do like to have mixed male and female panels. So just imagine that he's really in a dress. We all know that in Africa, as everywhere else, the private sector has a huge role to play. It can do amazing things. It can organize talent to drive growth. It can turn economic potential, of which there is lots in Africa, into meaningful progress. And it can not only generate, but crucially help spread wealth and opportunity across the continent. The SDGs, and we all know that we're not doing too well in achieving those by 2030, they rely on corporate action as well as government and third sector action. And there's a great deal to be done, and we have to do more. But you know, we can't be naive, because business also has a negative side. It has a checkered past, a patchy present, and there are dangers in the future. Mark's colleague and my dear friend Andrew Forrest, who sadly can't be with us today, memorably said just a few weeks ago, and he has a tendency for hyperbole, that it is business that will kill your children. We'll come back to that, I promise. So, prompted by that ever greater recognition of the harm we continue to do to our planet, to our wildlife, to our people around the world, the rules of the game are being changed. Businesses and investors are being made to account for how they negatively affect the enjoyment of human rights and our shared environment. Government, lawmakers, civil society and others are grappling seriously with the challenge of how to do this effectively, how to support good business and achieve sustainable development while no longer tolerating exploitation and other collateral damage. In fact, much of my time is spent advising my clients on the new wave of laws, legal risks and other measures which are intended to usher in an age of good corporate citizenship and business accountability. Now, the UN Development Programme has pointed out that Africa has lagged behind other regions in this work, but they're not telling the full story. African stakeholders have much to contribute, and we're hoping to highlight that by having a Concordia Africa conference on the continent in the near future, so watch out for that. But meanwhile, we are highlighting Africa in this excellent session today. So that's enough from me. Let's go on with it. So gentlemen, the opening question, I'm holding you to 1 minute each to just answer a very simple scene-setting question. What does corporate accountability, and I don't mean fluffy CSR, I mean serious accountability, mean to each of you? Shall we start actually with the corporate?
Okay, no, good. So look, it's a great question, right? So I think that we would view it as you have to be accountable as a corporation and be responsible for the problem that you've created, but equally you've got to be accountable for the solution. And I look at climate change, for example, at the moment. I mean, our view is, as Cherie, you rightly said, business is responsible for climate change. and so they should be accountable for that and made accountable. So when they have targets that they say they're going to decarbonize by 2040, 2050, they shouldn't be allowed to do that, because it's basically saying it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem. But equally, they should be accountable for the solution, because our view is that it's not people's fault we're in this situation with climate now, it's business's problem. And they don't really have an alternative to fossil fuels. So that's our job as industry, as business, to make sure there's an alternative.
Samaila?
So for us, accountability means, how well we are achieving our purpose, which is to accelerate development impact in Africa. And within the context of climate, is really around what is Africa's best path, to net zero, considering the fact that we really don't have emissions, but we have potential for significant solutions. So we have most of the minerals and metals that are required for the energy transition. We are also one of the only regions in the world where you can have significant renewable energy, process those minerals and metals. So it's about how do we shape the debate around Africa being a cornerstone in the solutions? How do we shape the debate around Africa providing the capacity going forward that is required for the energy transition? And how are we ensuring that everybody understands that this is the one planet that we have, and we should all work together to provide solutions?
Kola, as an African company?
From where we sit, what's important that we've always put in play is looking at ESG, taking environment as serious, the social impact of what we do within the confines of our business is also important. And the governance and the governance structure around what we're trying to deliver is very important as a fit for purpose to delivering value in the society or in the environment we work. If you look at where Africa is today and where Africa is going, we are starting, and we could start from a very clean slate. And that's the purposeful position where you have accountability should be a watchword for global and national and transnational companies operating on the continent.
And AG, I know you've been thinking a lot about this.
Yes, I think for me it's quite simple. Corporate accountability implies a company being held responsible, fully responsible for its actions. It implies a company being held accountable not only for the financial ends of its operations. So we talk about matters relating to sustainability, environment matters, as well as issues essentially bordering on the non-financials. And I think that two major words for me are implied in corporate accountability, and that is ethics and integrity. So we look at all the matters that we are or will be implicit in corporate accountability. These are matters that are geared ensuring that the company operates ethically and also a lot of integrity. Integrity implies being responsible for its environment, being responsible for the side effects of its production and what have you.
Well, Samaila, I think you put your finger on it, and this is another 1 minute one, when you said that Africa is affected by essentially problems that have been created outside of Africa, but you also hold many of the solutions. But the rules and formula that we are talking about today have mainly been formulated by the advanced economies. So what about an Africa answer to these problems? What homegrown African values and approaches should we be seeing? Maybe since you raised this, you can start this time.
Good, thank you for that. So after COP26 in Scotland, we were kind of alarmed at most of the resolutions and the general path, and the fact that the next COP was going to be in Africa, we felt that there was a need for us to create consensus, amongst African leaders on how to negotiate, because you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. So we came up with this white paper that said, okay, look, we're here, this is where we are, how do we move forward from here? Moving forward, with all the minerals and metals that are required, World Bank tells us 5 times more. We know electric car requires 6 times more than an internal combustion engine. Wind turbine requires 9 times more minerals and metals than a gas turbine. So all of this mining is going to take place around the world. Africa holds about 30% or even 40%. Actually, recently someone told me it was 37.8% of all the minerals and metals that are required. So we have to change the architecture of supply chain. We can't be extracting raw materials from Africa, exporting to far parts of Asia for processing, and then to the rest of the world. We feel that the best way for the world to get to net zero is to localize circular economies in Africa, using the renewable energy sources that we have in Africa for processing. We feel it's important that Africa is rebuilt in a way that it can withstand the impacts of climate change. We also feel that there's need for financial innovation to unlock all the finance that's required at scale, for development of these resources. And we have, several examples of what we're doing. So we are invested in a manganese mine that used to export all the output to China. We're putting in place a smelter now that would use hydroelectric power to process that, and that will create jobs, in the local economy. That will reduce immigration out of, Africa. It will reduce the challenge that European countries have in containing immigration. We think what is important going forward is how can we work together, in a way that we can unlock more financing. So, for example, instead of having all the aid budgets and having all the budget to contain immigration, how can we provide political risk or contract frustration insurance that will motivate additional investments into Africa? How can African leaders also take ownership of development and not seek permission, on how to utilize their resources? They should simply know that the money they invest in unlocking investments in Africa has far more return than putting the money in foreign banks, just because somebody says so. They need to take ownership of the fact that we have to make the initial investment that would drive additional opportunities. So, for example, last week we commissioned the wind farm in Djibouti. That is a project that would never have happened if we did not have African capital at place to first develop to de-risk and then attract international capital on the back of that. So now we have the country having 40% of its population having access to electricity that it would never have had. We have over 500,000 homes with access to electricity, and it's all green energy. And there is potential to increase that from 60 megawatts to 105 megawatts, and to really reduce emission of over 250,000 tons of carbon emissions.
This is why everybody should be thinking about what could we do to invest in Africa. But let me go to you, AG, because we were talking about African values, and I know Ghana hosted the first ever African Business and Human Rights Forum last year, and you now leading your country's national action plan on business and human rights, one of the first African states to do so. So why has Ghana decided to take the lead on this issue in Africa, and what does it mean for the country's relationship in the future with its corporate partners?
Well, I think first and foremost, the African Business and Human Rights Forum was inspired by the understanding that businesses impact the way we live our lives, whether as customers or consumers of their product, or even by simply living in the communities in which they operate. They affect our lives. So clearly there's an interaction between business and human rights. And of course, as the Attorney General, taking the view that indeed any legislative framework for the protection of human rights has to be state-centered, we decided to convene this forum for us to discuss such matters and all that. And I think it's also important to place on record that, of course, businesses exist to make profit. Businesses exist to use the best of their abilities to ensure that they derive as much maximum benefit from society as possible. And in doing so, there will be a lot of casualties. The society will, of course, be the casualty. But of course, the extent to which businesses will succeed in deriving maximum benefit from society without affecting or impacting society depends on the culture, depends on the society, depends on the values that the community itself holds. So we convened this forum, and of course we set out to undertake what we call a baseline assessment study of human rights in Ghana. And the baseline assessment study consisted of interviews of both scientifically, and of course other means, of about 100 stakeholders in human rights in Ghana. And that resulted in what you mentioned, the National Action Plan. The National Action Plan now has been set in motion, and it constitutes a team. A team has been constituted, a team drawn from all representations of relevant sectors: Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Finance, the Office of Attorney General, as well as the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. So it tells you that this National Action Plan actually involves the participation of those who are actively involved in the conduct of business. And the end is to ensure that these stakeholders come up with the basis for the enactment of legislation. And of course, even in the absence of legislation on business human rights in Ghana, we are also informed by our constitution, and our constitution requires us to develop an economic system in which people eke out their living equitably and fairly. And so
let me bring in Kola at this point. Kola, you're of course an African businessman in the field of energy and infrastructure. From Shoreline's perspective, what do you look for? What do you need from people like the Attorney General and from your business colleagues and the wider community and civil society to support you in providing a responsible and sustainable investment?
Thank you. I think a very important area we need to focus on looking at African entrepreneurs is Africa's shown we can leapfrog technology. By looking at mobile telephony and the advancement of mobile telephony on the continent from the late 1999 to early 2000. If you look at the equipment utilized on the continent today, it's the same equipment you have in the Western nations. That's shown that. But what's missing, global capital is looking for return, fact. But what is missing on the continent that needs to be focused and drilled down on is purposeful leadership that assures business and enterprise that what you say or what we say is what we do. Action plan. Look, we're in the oil and gas business as an example. If you look at Nigeria, this is a country with 210 TCF of natural gas. Yet, if you look at the shorts in Europe, Nigeria's got enough gas resource to fire Africa and export, be a major exporter into European market. Yet, this is a country short in power. So it just tells you there's a mismatch in the disconnect of purposeful leadership, entrepreneurship, and opportunities. And this is key. Look, step back again. If you look at most of the shorts in infrastructure, be it rail, proper roads and infrastructure, these are missing links in driving any major economy to success. If you look at the Western nations or the thriving nations, go to China. What did China do right the last 25 years? Huge investment in developing its infrastructure, to making its manufacturing and support services more efficient, and that drove their growth and the success story. Africa can never operate differently. And that's all we need to do. Purposeful leadership, dedicated entrepreneurship, and directed capital looking for effective returns.
And then Africa could actually do more trade within Africa, which would be a great thing for everybody. So, Mark, I started by quoting Andrew Forrest, business
It's dangerous.
will kill you. He always puts you in it. So, but actually, what did he mean, and what does this mean in relation to you as a non-African company coming in to do business in Africa?
Yeah, so really what Andrew's concerned about is that the countries who have not benefited as much on fossil fuel are the ones who are going to suffer the most. And we're in climate change now. We're in, 1.5 degrees is here. We don't really know what's going to happen beyond, when we get to 2.5 degrees. And he worries about that a lot, actually. And so, really, if you think about what business has done to the world, they've made us all we're all addicted to fossil fuels. And every day we pump emissions into the atmosphere, it just gets worse. So we've got to be part of that solution. And I think, in our view, Africa can play a massive part. And we've got to make sure that Africa doesn't miss the opportunity that they're going to be presented with. So we're a mining company, but also we basically bet the whole company on going into green hydrogen on a global basis. So for those who don't know what green hydrogen is, basically if you have renewable energy, in one part of the world, you need to send it somewhere else. You can put a cable down, or you can turn it to a molecule and put it on a ship. So when you're looking at taking power from Australia to Germany or whatever, you can't put a cable down, so you use green hydrogen. Africa has an amazing opportunity to be the producer of green hydrogen for the rest of the world. And we're doing two really exciting projects at the moment. One's in Namibia, where we're looking at taking green molecules to supply into Europe. And then we're doing another one in Kenya, which is, I think, just shows the opportunity in Africa, where we're taking, Kenya has too much renewable power, and so they cap some of their geothermal, and we're taking that geothermal power and turning it into fertilizer. So Kenya will make their own green fertilizer. They won't have to buy fossil fuel Russian fertilizer ever again, and they'll be able to supply the rest of Africa with green fertilizer. So look, our view is...
Is that happening now?
This is a project we're working through.
Yep.
We actually met President Ruto 1 year ago, so we're getting into that. But our view is Africa has a massive opportunity to in this transition, you talk about just transition, has a huge opportunity to be a player and help solve the problem for the world.
Well, let's go back then to my question. What are these African values and principles that Africa can contribute and should contribute to this debate about corporate accountability and sustainable future? What would you like to summarize? I think we've got 3 minutes left, so that's about, if we're quick, each of you can have almost a minute. Shall we start with you, Attorney General?
So in my view, the key is to recognizing what actually deters corporate accountability in Africa. And number one is corruption, if you ask me. So at least there ought to be structures in place which will deter the occurrence of corruption. And I think laws, as we are trying to enact in Ghana, like the Conduct of Public Officers Bill, is very important. We already set in place a whole gamut of regulations which affect the way public officers conduct their affairs, conflict of interest, and what have you. And then also, there must be in place, as speaking as an attorney general, an effective justice system which will take care of violations of human rights. So we have a justice system which clearly will ensure that all elements of the rule of law will be protected, and that whenever violations occur, they are punished. I think when these two major structures are put in place, then we'll be on the road to achieving corporate accountability in Ghana, Africa.
Kola, what would you say as an African businessman?
I think both national and transnational corporations must come to the continent to work on global standards and holding themselves accountable to the same norms. Also, utilizing the youthful population on the continent, making that a competitive advantage of what Africa has to offer to the world.
And from the perspective of an African-wide organization like the Development Bank?
So, having heard all we've heard about the opportunities that Africa has as a solution provider for climate and several other issues, I think we should be having a conversation now around what will it take for us to start a dialogue where we see Africa as an investment opportunity and not an aid or charity case. I think that is really what is important. How do we all get our minds to that perspective of an investment and not charity or aid?
Oh, that's good.
Mark?
Yeah, look, I think, if you look at, we're in America, right? So the IRA, most people will know what Inflation Reduction Act, massive stimulus for the economy, massive stimulus for America going to green energy, right? But there's nothing in Africa like that. And that's not fair. No. And so how do we get that equality across the globe, particularly in those places where they should be the ones who are going to be, take the most advantage from that? So I think financing, investment into Africa, having off-takers to take product out of Africa, those things are going to change the difference. But we can't let Africa not miss out on this opportunity. Yeah.
So I think the message is clear. Africa is very much open to business as an equal partner. As you said, this is not about aid. This is about hard-headed business opportunities and a real opportunity to shape the future with the resources of Africa that belong to the African people actually contributing to the solution. And with that, also the dignity of a right to be at the table to contribute to all these rules and regulations for the benefit of us all. So on that message, Come to Africa, hopefully next year when we have our Concordia in Africa. Meanwhile, if you've got any spare money, invest it wisely. Thank you.
All right.